My name is Maria Di Benigno, and I am the Mellon Postdoctoral Research Fellow at James Monroe's Highland in Charlottesville, Virginia. A few quick housekeeping items at the start. There will be time for Q&A at the end of today's presentation, so feel free to type those in the Q&A field, which is usually at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to type those in there throughout today's presentation as questions come to your minds. Today, during Women's History Month, we're incredibly fortunate to welcome Jarod Kearney, Assistant Director and Curator at the James Monroe Museum in Fredericksburg, Virginia, for a presentation that will showcase a selection of original items from the life of Elizabeth Kortright Monroe. Elizabeth Monroe's story is a fascinating one, from her childhood in New York through her experiences as wife of the Minister to France and later 5th U.S. President. Jarod will illustrate Elizabeth's life using museum collections that have been handed down through generations of the Monroe family. A bit about our speaker. Jarod Kearney began as curator of the James Monroe Museum and Library in November of 2011. Previously, he was curator of the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library and Museum in Stanton, Virginia. And prior to that, curator of the Rye Historical Society in New York. He has been director of the Hallockville Museum, Farm, and Folklife Center on Long Island, and worked at the Greensboro Historical Museum in North Carolina. Jarod received his MA in Museum Studies and BA in History from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. He is also a blacksmith, woodworker, raises bonsai trees, is a photographer, and has acted in numerous films. It's wonderful to have him with us today. And again, there will be time for Q&A at the end of our presentation, so please feel free to leave those at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the Zoom over to Jarod.
Right. Well, hello. Thank you so much for that great intro, and thank you, Highland, and the James Monroe Museum for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to show you some really cool stuff from Elizabeth Monroe's life. Now, before I begin, before I sort of jump into the material culture, some of these cool artifacts that I have here, I'm going to ask you a question. If you're in your house and time suddenly froze and everything just sort of stood still, and hundreds of years from now, folks were looking at the artifacts, the items that were in your house, what would those items say about you? What story would they tell? And my guess is they would probably say an awful lot, right? Artifacts and collections, they're not just separate from us, they're a part of our story, and they're a part of who we are and who we were and who we will be. I know it sounds a little deep, but anyway, and that's what these artifacts do. They tell a story. And I'm going to start with something pretty cool. I'm going to dive right in. So let me pull this up and I'm going to show you this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show these artifacts to the camera, and hopefully you'll be able to have a good view of these. Okay, so what is this? What is it that I am holding here? This is Elizabeth Monroe's Necessaire, and it belonged to her. And it's actually cast with a gild of gold over on top. And you see, I have sort of these fancy cast carvings and all that stuff and everything. It's like, okay, well, but what is it? What exactly is going on here? Well, I'll show you. So if you open it up, there's all kinds of stuff that are actually in this Necessaire. And it's something that she would have used. And people ask about practicality of things, what would Elizabeth Monroe, practically would have carried around with her? Well, this exactly is one of them right here. So the Necessaire is sort of like, a comparable would be sort of like a pocket watch, or it's a pocket watch, excuse me, a pocket knife, like a Swiss Army knife. It has all that kind of stuff on there. What am I talking about? Well, I'll show you. Okay, first of all, I'll show you this. This is something that would have been in there. Okay, look at this little sucker. All right, look at this. So, and I don't know if the camera's showing it that well, but it's actually a little knife, and it's got a little screw on the end there, little threads that would actually screw in. So you can have a little knife, so you could use it for, and she most likely would have used this for eating or actually for sharpening graphite. And I'll get a little more into that in just a second. That's because that's kind of cool too. And then, of course, this companion piece, you have a fork. All right, can you see that? All right, so you have an actual fork with two tines. Notice there's two, and not a whole bunch more. That was typical of the time period. And threads on the back, on the end of it as well. So these things, actually, there's a little extender that's in here, and you can pull it out. And believe it or not, there's actually a little extender that you can screw those on the top. So if you wanted to, theoretically, you could have a meal with this thing. Now, the question I get is like, well, would they have actually done that? Probably not. But Elizabeth Monroe would have had the ability and the capability of doing it if she so chose. Another thing that I want to show you, then of course, there's a little spoon to go along with her. That's right, very good. And then I want to show you this. Okay, let me pull this up here if I can get it. All right, what on earth is that? Okay, this was in the Nasser, and what on earth is it? Well, believe it or not, and I could sort of turn it here, this is actually, believe it or not, an ear scoop. That's right, you heard that right. This is an ear scoop that would have cleaned out the ear. And it sounds ridiculous, but this is actually something that they would have used. And yes, people did in fact injure themselves using this thing. It's made out of metal. They injured themselves using this thing. I looked it up. People actually did injure themselves. But nevertheless, there you go, an ear scoop for cleaning out the ear that would have been in her lovely Nasser here. Something else is kind of interesting that was in here. You have a measuring stick here, right? And what was interesting about this is, this kind of Nasser, okay? This here was made by both French and English firms, okay? And, it's really hard to tell them apart because they both have very, very similar looks to them. They both, have these kind of cast carvings and everything. And this doesn't have any markings on it, okay? So the mystery, it was like a mystery. It's like, well, where is it, French or English? Well, I was looking at this, looking close up, and lo and behold, it actually is the metric system. So that tells us that this was French. So this was made in French because the English we're not using the metric system back in those days, to this day. So there you go. Let me show you this little piece here. Okay, I'm gonna pull this out here. All right. What on earth is this? Okay. This, believe it or not, was the notepad for Elizabeth Monroe. Okay. So what am I talking about? Well, I was talking about graphics with pencils. They actually did do that. They had a little graphite. The pencils weren't quite the same as they are today, but it was graphite, and graphite will actually write on this. And what is this? Well, it's not bone, it's actually ivory. And so it's a little piece of ivory slab that she could write on here in her daily life. So it goes to show that she had actually that ability, that capability to write herself notes. And we actually up in the museum have another one that's bigger slabs of ivory that they would have wrote themselves notes back then. So they actually did do that. And it's something that we still do today, except it's a little different now today, right? We type it into iPods or Androids or whatever like that. We send ourselves little reminders. Well, this is the iPad or Android of back then, at least on some level. But so you say, well, wouldn't the graphite wipe off? Well, actually, unless you specifically wipe off the graphite, it actually stays on there. And how do I know this? Well, you can do an experiment at your house if you want to. If you take a tag, like a garden tag for garden plants, write one with pen, and then write another with graphite, okay? And stick them outside. And the pen, the graphite, the pencil will last way longer than the pen will. The pen will fade and everything. So graphite will actually last on here. And it's like that's a little museum or a little antique tip for you. If you ever buy one of these, look carefully. You might be able to, with certain light, be able to see some of the notes that they actually still wrote on. So there you go, Elizabeth Monroe's Nasser. This is something that she would have carried with her. It shows practicality. Okay, there's a lot of sort of practical things here, but it also shows a certain fashion, a certain style. Someone in her position as back then, at least, as wife of the ambassador would have had. And I'll actually get a little bit more into that in just a little bit. Okay, so what else do I have here? All right, so people ask about, okay, so what exactly, as far as like accoutrements and things that we have with Elizabeth Monroe, I'm going to show you this. Okay, what is going on here? Okay, this looks like, at least in modern terms, it looks like a modern slipper or something you might wear if you're, lounging around at night or something like this. But this is actually a slipper in the ballet style. And this was very Regency period. Okay, you can see, someone like, someone from a Jane Austen novel wearing something like this. And this belonged to Elizabeth Monroe, and this is something she would have worn around the turn of the century. Now, something that's interesting about that is if you look at this shoe here, okay, so this shoe belonged to Elizabeth Monroe's mother. So look at this, and so this would have been just a couple decades later, but you can see how radically the styles changed and how radically they were. And especially, why does this matter? Well, it matters in the sense that if you can imagine Elizabeth Monroe going with her husband over to Europe, back in those days, especially the first time in the mid 1790s, the first time, Europe was, they didn't know what to make of us. Most of them thought we'd fail. They were like, who are these upstarts? Everything. France was a little bit more. We were more popular with France, and so we went over there. For all the, they might have been expecting the Americans to show up in, barefoot for all they know, and so they didn't know what to make of this new American country. So in a sense, it was important to wear styles that were reflective of the society in which you were going in. So if they were being ambassadors to France, you would want to wear something that was sort of the latest fashion, especially in the position of being an ambassador's wife, because it's not just for the hoity-toity part of it. It's because it's important in establishing that we are serious. You know what I mean? Like, we are serious. We are a country. We are formed, and we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. We're not going to collapse like a lot of people thought we would. And so as bizarre as it sounds, little details like that actually matter. And it mattered to Elizabeth Monroe, and it mattered to James Monroe. At the same time, they weren't overly done. In fact, why don't I transition to this dress back here? Okay, so this is a gown. It's very, very Regency period, right? It's very Jane Austen. And this gown belonged to Elizabeth Monroe, and she wore this overseas. And this would have been more during the second diplomatic mission after the turn of the 1800s, at the turn of the 19th century. And so you can see it's very slick, it's very straightforward. It's a lot different than those gowns that were coming out just a couple decades beforehand. They were much more lavish. They were much more, had the bodices, and they had, they were much wider and bigger and everything like this. This is more sleek, more streamlined, right? It's more, I don't know, at least for back then, if you could imagine, it would have been more modern. You know what I mean? Like nowadays it looks old fashioned, right? But back then, this would have been modern. This would have been new. This would have been the style to wear. And it is actually made out of, believe it or not, it's actually made out of velvet. And what's really interesting about this, just sort of a side tangent, nerd tangent here, is that velvet, you know how they make velvet? Well, they actually, they have two pieces of material, right, that are sort of, that are intertwined in between. And back then, they actually have a machine that done by hand that would cut the material in half. What am I talking about? Oh, actually, I have a little picture here. You can see that. I know it's reversed, I apologize. But you can see the machine would cut and create this. And this right here, those threads sticking out, that's what makes that velvet texture. So whenever you're seeing velvet, you're actually seeing the inside of a cut two-piece of material, which is kind of cool. Anyway, so Elizabeth would have worn this, okay? And she, we don't have it, but she would have worn, like, especially in formal occasions, there's likely she would have had this gold sort of drapery, a scarf that would have gone around and it would have folded around her. We do not have that. So it would have added sort of a little extra something to it. And again, it's very much in the style of the time. It's not overly done. That's very much in sort of theme with the Monroes and their aesthetic. They wanted to have enough fanciness that they belonged in the room, but not enough to overdo it and enough to state that this is our own sort of, this is our own style. And that's reflective of what was happening in America at the time. We were forming our country. We were forming our identity, all right? And so the material culture reflects that. we were, borrowing some things from Europe. We were certainly, certain styles and everything, but we also had our own thing going. So, with Monroe, it wasn't overly done. And you can see that in a lot of their clothing, a lot of their materials that they purchased and things and everything, where, it was good, but it wasn't crazy over the top. So it's kind of cool. All right, what else have I got here? All right, I'm going to show you this. Okay, I'm going to show you this. This is a cameo that belongs to Elizabeth Monroe. All right, you see that? Okay, so something that's really cool about this, all right, is these were all handmade, and they're actually still handmade to this day. What exactly is happening here? What's going on? Well, why is it white here and then a pinker color here? This is actually made out of shell, okay? And what they would do, okay, if you can imagine this, and they do this to this day, is you pick the seashell, right? And you cut out a piece of the oval for the cameo, and then the craftsman, imagine the craftsmanship of this. The craftsman slowly starts carving away. They slowly start carving away so that there's white, 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 and then they get down to that actually pink, the center part of that shell. Because if you look at a shell, the inside of the shells, the conch shells, right, are pinkish, kind of reddish on the inside, and then the outside there's that white, that shell white, and that's what they're doing. There's a carving up just enough to get to the shell, to get to the inner part of the shell, but to reveal and show the outer part as the relief, which is an astounding piece of hand craftsmanship. And this was all done by hand. Everything I'm showing you was done by hand. Think about that. Like the dress, the stare, these were all done by hand. It's really pretty amazing. So what? It's like, well, what's the big deal with this? Well, Elizabeth would want to, again, make sure, as part of who she were and part of how she was presenting herself, be in with the latest fashions, not overdone, but in with the latest fashions. And lo and behold, who was a big fan of cameos but Napoleon? Okay, Napoleon and his wife Josephine, they were a big fan of cameos. Why were they a big fan of cameos? Well, when Napoleon was invading into Italy and Greece and going into those old school, especially in Italy, going into those old school places, they would find ancient Roman cameos that were done in the exact same way. The exact same way. And he would send some back to Josephine, and Josephine fell in love with them. And so cameos became popular and became sort of a fashion again, because in part because Napoleon was invading other countries. It's kind of messed up, right? But that's exactly what was happening. So Napoleon had these all done up, and it's actually a really beautiful piece that we have here today. And again, this belonged to Elizabeth Monroe. And what's kind of cool about this is that you don't really see a lot of these anymore, but every once in a while you'll still see one that was sort of worn in fashion. So it's something that as it sort of span the time period, span the decades. And that's kind of what's cool about artifacts, right? Some artifacts span the decades. Some things, certain types of dresses, certain types of shoes, maybe, things like that, span, many, many time periods. Like you would very easily maybe see someone, have this in the 1960s or something like that, wearing one of these, or even today, versus 200 years ago. But then there are artifacts that you don't see anymore, that are not going to come around again, and they exist only because we still have them and we take care of them. And I am going to show you one such artifact. All right, what is this? Okay, let me pull this up. What is going on here? What is this? You see that? All right, this, and I'll pull up the lid here. This is a vinaigrette. Okay, what on earth is a vinaigrette? It's something you don't see anymore. Well, a vinaigrette actually was to help with smells, to put it plainly. They were sort of the deodorants of back in that time period. So when you have a vinaigrette like this, you see this. And what they would do is they actually, and I have it here, I'm going to hold it up. They actually had, look at that, a little tiny sponge. I'm not making this up. This little tiny sponge that would go inside the vinaigrette. And the vinaigrette here, if you look at this on the inside, there's silver on the outside, and on the inside is gold. And that's because the vinaigrette was acidic, right? Like the sponge, they would soak up some of the anti-odor stuff was actually, there was vinegar was part of the ingredients in a lot of these. So you can imagine the vinegar smell. It's a little bit strange, right? So the sponge would just go inside this little compartment that's right in here, and you would actually help to mask smells. So that's what that is. It's actually sort of a little anti-deodorant, or excuse me, a deodorant little accoutrement there. And what's kind of cool about this too is that I blew up a picture. This actually was made by John Shaw, an English silversmith. And if you can see this, this is actually a detail of the inside of the vinaigrette. And look at that. It's like a little flower pot, you know what I mean? To sort of symbolize, something fresh smelling. So that's exactly what was going on with this. Again, this is an artifact. This is not an artifact that spans time. This is one that is gone with the wind, as I say. It's just, we don't make these anymore, at least not for the purpose that we would have back in the day. So I just think it's kind of cool. Also, if you want to talk about bureaucracy, and I'll show another thing that has to do with that. Here are some of the maker's marks that were actually marked into this tiny, tiny little vinaigrette that was because of actual laws, silver laws back in the day. And I'll piggyback off that a little bit, and I'll show you. Let's see if I can find. Oh, let's see if I can find. Do I not have the? Oh, I guess I don't have it. Okay, well, never mind. There's actually we have a perfume bottle in the collection, and the perfume bottle is really, really tiny, and they actually have maker's marks that are on the inside of Elizabeth Monroe's perfume bottle, these tiny little Dutch maker marks, and you can't even see them with the eye. So if you think about bureaucracy, and is it a new thing? No, bureaucracy is the one constant, as Bones said in Star Trek, it's the one constant in the universe is bureaucracy. So they still did that all the way back then. Okay. Something that I get asked a lot about, I'm just going to show you this real quick. And I'm going to hold this up. All right, this is a fan favorite here. What is this? There's little baby shoes that belong to Elizabeth, or belong to Eliza. And Elizabeth Monroe, she had 3 children actually. Eliza was born in 1786. Mariah was 1802, and James Spencer was 1799, and he unfortunately passed very, very young. But people ask, back in the day, did they have such a thing as baby shoes? Well, there you go. It absolutely did. And there's this actually made out of leather, believe it or not. So little tiny baby shoes that would have belonged to Elizabeth Monroe's daughter. So yes, that is something that motherhood has not changed, over the years. Okay. So what I want to show you next is I want to show you this incredible piece of jewelry here. Okay, this is a tiara, right? And you can see the prongs that go in there. And this belonged to Elizabeth Monroe. And again, this would have been worn by her throughout, during the public life as the wife of a diplomat, as the wife of the future president. This is something that you would want to have in order to establish that you're serious and mean business, and you actually do have the ability to be in the room with other countries and things like that. But what is it specifically? Look at this tiara. Okay, look at this. This is actually, each one of these are coral, little pieces of coral beads on gold. Okay, so you can imagine the craftsmanship of actually shaping each one of these pieces. Okay, so each one of these had to be done and then drilled into and then put individually onto the tiara. And so tiaras kind of are making a little bit of a comeback, aren't they? They sort of kind of went away for a while, but you see like little kids sometimes still wear them and stuff like that. But yeah, this one, she would have bought this while she was over in France. And again, this is something that she would have worn at special occasions, formal events, things like that. And it was sort of a necessity to be able to mix and match, at least with the other diplomatic corps. Okay, now I'm going to get into this part here, and I want to show you this piece. Okay, very careful. And I put on a black background. Okay, what is this? Look at that. This is Elizabeth Monroe's aquamarine necklace. Okay, and I'm sorry.
Hi, all. It looks like we lost Jared briefly. I'm
Hello?
gonna.
I'm
Jared,
so
are you
sorry.
there? There you are.
Now for some reason, I'm trying to see if I can start the. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, yes.
Okay.
Just can't see you.
Okay. Um, it says it needs to, sorry about this, y'all. It says it needs to be, oh, there we go, enabled. I think it worked.
There you
I think,
are.
okay. Sorry, but I don't know what happened. The Zoom just went out for some reason. I don't know
Okay.
what's going on with that. But we're back. Okay.
You're
Um,
back.
we are back. Okay. And where I sort of left off, let me see here. This is Elizabeth Monroe's necklace. This is aquamarine. Okay. And you see this big old bulbous cross and everything that's going on here. And it's like, well, was this fashionable at the time? Well, let me show you something. When I was doing research on an exhibit for this sort of thing, I came across this picture of ceramic sellers in France around the same time period that Elizabeth Monroe would have worn this necklace. And if you could see up close, look at the necklace that she is wearing right there. See that? That necklace she's wearing, the bulbous sort of stones, the bulbous cross. Well, lo and behold, it is the same exact necklace, the same exact style. So Elizabeth Monroe knew her stuff. She actually knew her stuff. And this is aquamarine, like I said, and it's surrounded by, it looks like copper, this superb, amazing craftsmanship. Now, you might ask yourself, okay, so what? Okay, so she's got some fancy jewelry and things like that. You know, okay, what's the point? What's the big deal? Well, okay, let me tell you a story. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Imagine you are Elizabeth Monroe. Just imagine for a second you are Elizabeth Monroe, and you are accompanying your husband over to France in the mid 1790s. You know, you're accompanying him over there. Now, you were born into, you know, moderate wealth. Your father, Lawrence Kortright, he was a wealthy merchant. So it's not crazily opulent. You know, you're not completely unused to, you know, the opulence of Paris and everything, but it would have been something to see. It would have been overwhelming. You go over there, and the climate of the time, okay, imagine this, okay, the climate of the time, you're right with the waning part of the Committee of Public Safety, okay? You're right at the waning part of that. So you're in the 1790s in France, and there was executions going on. There was craziness going on, okay? There's an aura of paranoia that was happening in Paris and France at the time. You know, people were getting executed, all right? People were getting killed, you know, in Paris and France, and not just people, but the people of your class, of you know, sort of the upper class, you know, nobility, you know, things like that, you know, wealthy folks, they were getting executed. So you're there with your husband. Now, one good thing is that, you know, at that point, France sort of appreciated the U.S. They had a really good relationship at that time, but still, there's this sort of just not a very good vibe in France. Okay, so you're showing up as this young woman in France at the time. Okay, now your husband's friend, the Marquis de Lafayette. Okay, he's a, you know, as you know, the Marquis de Lafayette. He was, you know, famously helped the U.S. out in the war, in the Revolutionary War, and he was a really good friend of your husband's. Now he is imprisoned up in Austria. Okay, he's up there, up in prison, and his young wife, Marquis Lafayette's young wife, was imprisoned, and her name is Adrienne. She was imprisoned in the same city that you just arrived in. Okay, and these are friends of the family. Okay, these are important folks. Now, the wife's uncle, this is the uncle of Adrienne, pleads with Monroe to do something, okay? Do something to free her from this prison in Paris, because guess what? The chances of her being executed were really, really good. They were really high. So, you know, this wasn't a joke. This wasn't just some slap on the wrist. This was a serious thing, okay? So the uncle pleads to Monroe to let her go. Well, the problem is Monroe, James Monroe, is in a really tough bind at the time, okay? He's in a tough bind because as an ambassador, he can't really make these crazy waves. You're just starting off as a country. You can't, like, you know, go over there and just start making these giant waves and say, oh, you got to release this, and making all these demands. He had to walk this tight line, okay? And so what do? You want to help out the wife of your friend, who's probably might likely be executed. You want to help her out, but what you can't, what can you do? Well, this is where Elizabeth comes in. Okay, so you can imagine this young woman in France with all this new stuff, all this new sights and sounds, you know, probably a little scared, a little intimidated. Well, what does she do? Okay, at the time, there weren't a lot of fancy carriages in Paris, like for rent or things like that. You know, those times were, you know, everything was in chaos. All right, and so they get a carriage, and Elizabeth has it gussied up. Okay, they make the carriage look really important, like a diplomatic carriage. Okay, and so she gets in the carriage, and she gussies up herself with, you might have guessed it, jewelry just like this, a tiara just like this. Okay, she would have gussied up with, you know, a cameo, a fancy cameo, you know, just like this, carrying in the ceremony, maybe, you know, I have this as part of the package there, just like that. Okay, maybe a dress, something like this. So she gets gussied up, so she looks like the wife of an ambassador. Okay, now they go down, she drives the carriage, they get down to the front gate, and she gets out of the carriage, and you can imagine a crowd gathers around. And you have to understand, at this point, she was sort of known in the fact they actually called her La Belle Americaine, the beautiful American. Okay, so she was actually known a little bit. So people was like, wait a minute, is that the diplomat's wife getting out? Is that Elizabeth Monroe getting out of the carriage? What is she doing here at the prison? Well, she gets out and this crowd starts to gather up. She strolls right up to the gate and she demands to see Adrian. You know, so you can imagine the captain of the prison guard is standing there at the gate, and here is the diplomat's wife coming up, all gussied up, looking important, you know, looking like if you don't do what I say, you're going to get in trouble. And that was the whole point of all that show, because you're going to get in trouble. And so what does he do? Well, he lets her in because he really had no choice. And you can imagine poor Adrian, because she's inside and she's in the prison. She doesn't know what's going on. All she knows is that they come to her door and they say, you know, we need you. You know, we're gonna get you out of the door here. And so she's like, in her mind, she might be getting executed, right? But what does she see? Lo and behold, she sees Elizabeth Monroe standing there. And what was interesting about that is that moment was not lost on people. Okay, you can imagine the people standing around and sort of in all this darkness and all of this this paranoia and, you know, doom and gloom and no hope for the future. There's this little light of sort of bravery that happens in the middle of that, and people started talking about it, and sort of the word sort of gets around. Monroe couldn't do anything officially, but he starts, you know, going behind the scenes and asking, you know, approaching the Committee of Public Safety, you know, just you know, what can we do here? And so the short story of it is that, and oh, and you got to imagine also Adrian's mother and her grandmother were both executed. So her coming up in the short story is that Adrian was actually released. She was actually let go, really because of that act of bravery that Elizabeth did. And part of these artifacts, you know, these things helped her create that presence, create that story to the people around her, that she was somebody that needed to be listened to. And you're going to let her go. You're going to let you know, Adrian go. And Adrian ended up going free. And Adrian, being the brave person that she was, went up to Austria and negotiated with the emperor to let her stay with Lafayette, with her kids, in the prison for 5 years. So anyway, so you wonder about who Elizabeth Monroe was and what do artifacts tell her about that. That really, to me, is the heart of it. You know, you have all these things that sort of help out. And so in a way, these things helped save a woman's life, as bizarre as that sounds, in sort of a roundabout way, but yes, in many ways. And these artifacts are here. We have them. And I know Highland has a bunch too. So that's why it's important to cherish these artifacts and to let them tell their story, and to save them for the future. Because if you and I don't, then who will? Anyway, I think I will maybe stop it there and see if we have any questions from folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jarod. That was spectacular. Thank you so much for speaking so passionately about the importance of material culture and the ways that items can tell us these important political and diplomatic and international history. So that's beautiful. Thank you. We do have some questions from our audience, and I'm going to go in the order that they were entered into our Q&A. And so to begin with, there's a question about, do any objects reflect Elizabeth's New York heritage?
I'm going to say yes. The short answer is yes. We actually have a wedding dress that it could have been her wedding dress, that was used from material that most likely belonged to her mother. So this would have been a New York. You know what? I'm going to show you. I don't care. I'm going to show you. I'm going to bring you over there. All right. Here, come with me.
Yeah, all right. Take us around. Thank you.
All right. Let me show you. Because I have it right here. It's kind of cool.
Right. I love the collection spaces. This is truly behind the scenes.
Yes. Can you see this here?
I can see that. Yes.
Yeah. So this this actually belonged to Elizabeth Monroe, but the material is older and likely belonged to her mother. So this material would have had that sort. It would have come from overseas, but it would have been imported into New York, maybe by her father, who was a merchant. And so it had a sort of that New York stamp, you know. But there it is.
Wow.
I wanted to show you that. All right.
That's absolutely beautiful. Kind of in line with thinking about materials, there was a question of what other material was in that spectacular coral tiara that you showed us.
Oh yeah, it's gold.
Gold.
Yeah, it's actually mostly gold. These tins here, I think, are copper, if I'm not mistaken. So there's gold. In fact, it might be an alloy of copper to make it a little bit stronger. It is definitely soft, so I'm going to say it's probably, if it's copper, if it has another metal in it, it's probably tin, and it's probably a little bit less. But yeah, it's mostly just gold and coral. It's just astounding.
Yeah,
just the craftsmanship on it. Yeah, it's amazing.
On that line of craftsmanship and the notion of the makers of some of these items, there was a question about, since we're looking at her objects, her property, can you tell us about her relationship to slavery in this era when slaves were considered property, and I arguably may have been making some of these items as well?
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. And the shorter answer is the Monroes, they owned over the course of their life some 250 slaves. And I think you speak, if I'm not mistaken, about that. Their wealth, as far as management of their farm, everything was all based on slavery. They in Monroe, bought and sold, and Elizabeth Monroe, was in that family and part of it. Now, as far as her personal relationships, I don't know as much. Highland, has done a lot of wonderful research with that. But we actually have in the museum, I don't have it here with me, but we do have several items that were crafted by slaves. And, and that's the truth of it. And so, like we have a Betty lamp, we have some of the, I wonder if I can pull out, well, I think it's sort of buried in there. But yeah, we do have items that were crafted by slaves. I don't believe any of these particular ones were, but we do have those items. So yeah, that was an integral part, and that's the truth of it.
Yeah. Thank you. A question about Elizabeth's parents. Were they well traveled?
Well, Lawrence was a merchant. so there would have been some traveling going on there. As far as translating into Elizabeth, I don't know how much she actually went in and out of the country, as far as that goes, but he would have been familiar certainly with international, sort of vibes and people coming and going. So how well traveled? I don't know the exact extent of it, but there would have been some.
Yeah. Are items on display at the James Monroe Museum with a description and story on each item? Are these items, for example, are they on display? Do you keep them in storage? I know preservation, conservation are always an issue with textiles in particular, so.
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. A lot of these are actually out on exhibit. We actually have an exhibit up right now that has QR codes on each of the artifacts that you can scan, and it'll bring you to a different curator chat where I talk about them. And
Cool.
they're all online as well. So these curator chats, they're either on our Facebook or some of them are on YouTube, I think, but I think mostly they're on our Facebook Live. So yeah, so the answer is yes. I think these shoes aren't currently out, but the Serre's out, and the cameo, the dress will go back up. So yeah, come on by and see, and go to Highland too. Go to both of us.
Yeah, lots of places to see some of these items and at least learn about them. Certainly, I like the curator chats. I'll be sure to personally be checking out. So that sounds wonderful. Yeah. There is, I got two more questions at least here in our Q&A. Does the collection include French or British ceramics that were owned by the Monroes?
Yeah, yes. We have tons of those. In fact, that I know I can grab real quick. If you'll bear with me 1 second, I'm going to run over.
Yes.
Just going to run over and grab.
We will bear with you.
All right. I think I can get it over here real quick. Okay. So, all right. All right, I'm coming back, I promise. This is a good example. This is the French. This is actually one of the first White House china to come out. And you could see it actually has the Monroe crest on there. And it has 20 stars around the inside, which symbolizes 20 states. So the year be 1817, if I'm not mistaken. And it has sort of the gold rim, but this was made in Paris, and this is called hard paste porcelain. And hard paste porcelain is a little bit tougher. You can see it's a little bit stronger than soft paste, which you see a lot today. And something that's sort of interesting is whenever they were putting in bids for ceramics to decorate the White House, and this would have been later, to decorate the White House, there were 30 firms around Paris at the time that were making porcelain that could be good enough to be in the White House, so to speak. And interestingly, Monroe was so beloved in France, all 30 of them bid. Now you may say that that's a money thing, but all 30 of them, I mean, come on, that's a lot. So they all bid on it because I think everyone wanted to make porcelain for the friends of France.
Exactly. Yeah. They're so beautiful and elegant too. I love those. I love that piece. A really interesting question I had too about the dress. The gold dress has lacing up the back. Does the other dress have closures in the back, or would she have been sewed into that dress? That's a question I also have had with some of these dresses. Yeah.
Sewn into it. I don't know about that. I'll be completely honest. I don't know much about the actual putting the dress on. I feel like I've heard this somewhere, but I don't want to speak out of turn. There are clasps in the back of that one, so I don't think she would have been sewn into this. This one certainly not. I think this was a little bit more sleeker. You're not worrying about the whole getting you pulled in. But yeah, I have heard that somebody sewn in, but I guess my answer is I don't think so. It's certainly no on this one, and the other one it has clasps on the back. I think she would have just been put in.
Put in tight. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question about that aquamarine cross necklace. Would a merchant's wife, as depicted in the picture you shared, which was amazing, have worn something so costly, or would hers have been made of less valuable materials?
That's a great question. Interestingly, the aquamarine is not that crazy expensive. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's expensive, but it's not like diamonds or emeralds or something. It's on a lower tier, to be frank, as far as that sort of thing goes. So this is something that would have been a little bit more affordable. And when I say affordable, that sounds very hoity-toity. But this would have been within the grasp of someone who was not crazy wealthy. So yeah, it's very, there could have been, even the style certainly was the same, but the gems, because it's black and white picture, we don't really know the engraving, but the gems could have been something even less than aquamarine. So that's actually a good catch. It could have been something, it could have been glass maybe, or something, or not glass, it would have been crystal actually. The difference between glass and crystal is the lead content, and you can sort of almost see the difference a little bit, as bizarre as that sounds. So yeah, you're right. A clerk or a merchant, so this picture again, in this situation, may not even had aquamarine, but she would have had the style, which I think is the important thing.
Yeah, the look was what mattered.
Yeah.
Question that's coming to us from our Facebook audience. How tall was Elizabeth Monroe? From the dress, she looks like she may have been a short woman.
Yeah, were you looking around 5'2" in there? Yeah, so there's, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
She's not a
terrible. No. And that I must have made a striking couple, with Monroe being,
Yeah, he was around 6, right? Yeah.
Good. He's a tall gentleman, and her being shorter.
Yeah.
There was a question about a really interesting one about this particular period of European history. In the French Revolution, which separates secular from the religious, would wearing a cross have been especially dangerous for anyone, really?
Yeah, it didn't seem to be. And that's a good observation. It's like, why, was it so? So I don't think it was to the point where it was like, considered like an offense. You know what I mean? So because you do see them, you still see crosses, in the pictures of that time period and stuff. I would imagine though, but you're right. I would imagine, religion certainly just in general was not a great topic at that point in time. But yeah, it doesn't seem to have affected the necklace and things, a whole lot. So
yeah, very interesting. That exhausts at least the questions so far in our Q&A, and we've got like 10 minutes left with you. And so I had a quick question, if that's okay, about mostly you're starting with the Nasser, which several people asked for the spelling, and I hope I did it justice in the chat. But I think I know I did. But how do we learn, or you as a curator learn about unfamiliar or unknown or now objects that are obsolete? What are some of the ways that you can figure out what something was used for, like the spoon, for example? How do we learn about these kind of weird little things?
That's a great question. If you get an artifact and you don't really know what's going on with it, what I like to do, I call it sort of the craftsman approach to history. I like to start at least with how it was made. That's where I like to start. Especially if you don't know really much about it or anything like that. So like in the Nasser, it's like, well, how was it made? Okay, just start simple. It was cast. It wasn't carved, which means that someone molded a cast out of it. What are the materials made out of? The materials, are they something that would have been time appropriate? Do we know, like, for example, if this is gilded, if were they not doing that around the time period we think it was, then we know that it was either an anomaly or it's a different time period. So I like to approach it and how it was actually made. If you can sort of locate down who was making it in that particular style at the time, that helps a lot. Like, for example, we have gloves here that they're just doe skin gloves, and they're really, really simple. So there's really not much more, but at the very least, that doe skin as a material was popular in the U.S., because we have an abundance of raw material, which is a horrible way of saying we have an abundance of deer, and way more than Europe. So doe skin would have been how they would have made them here in the U.S. So that's one way you can pinpoint it down. And then fortunately with the internet, we have a lot more access to things now. We have word searches, and then you compare and contrast, and you just sort of do detective work and sort of drill down what you can find. And another thing I like to do is a lot of times there are maker's marks and things on these that are not visible to the naked eye. So I'll literally just take a magnifying glass and scour every inch of it and just see if I can find. And a few times I've actually found that. In fact, the example I was using with the perfume bottle, you couldn't see these with the naked eye. There's no way. And so, that's another way to do is just scour everything you can about it. And eventually the pieces sort of come together, especially when there's no smoking gun.
Yeah. Are there any existing written documents about Elizabeth Monroe's personal items? Do we know anything from letters, either perhaps from her hand, which I know are few and far, but
Yeah.
anything about her through letters?
Yeah, as far as these artifacts specifically, I don't know of any letters talking specifically, unfortunately, about these items. Like, by the way, Elizabeth purchased a aquamarine, necklace or something like that. So as far as I know, there's not a whole lot that actually tracks down a specific item, unfortunately. I wish there was. If you find one, please send it our way. For
I
sure.
was going to say, are there any items that you would love to know more about, or she had, but we don't have in hand anywhere? If there's
I would love to know more about the specific, especially the wedding dress I showed you before. If we could find something that said, oh, on her wedding day she wore, because we say wedding dress because it was about the same time that she would have had a wedding, and it's something that you could have worn to a wedding then. So it's more, it's more supposition. But I would love to have a letter just saying, oh, she wore a floral pattern with this, on her wedding day. That would be pretty cool. Sure.
That would be the bow on the interpretation.
That'd be neat.
I love that. There is one more question about, or actually a couple more questions. Do we know anything about the Dutch heritage of her name, I'm assuming Kortright, of her maiden name?
Oh, the Dutch heritage. Gosh, again, I don't know much about the Dutch heritage side of her.
Yeah.
But that's a great question. I can find out and get back to you. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think there's a lot about Elizabeth that are wonderful research questions about,
Yeah.
her upbringing, which is Gwen's question here in the Q&A. How was she taught as a child? Was it a governess? Did she go to a school?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know that that we actually have samplers and things like that. That a lot of the teaching would have been, especially New York, being a Dutch colony and that sort of thing. The education would have been a little bit better. So we have actually examples of samplers that were done. Especially about her children that would say they would actually learn how to read, how to write, learn how to do that, and actually sew it in there. So you're looking at sewing and sort of basic life skills like that. So her education would have been certainly more in New York than it would have been in a lot of other places, especially in the U.S. at the time. So a little bit more comprehensive.
Yeah, beautiful. And we have at Highland a sampler from that Mariah, her younger daughter, did, I think when she was 11, that she wrought when she was 11. So it's something to see in the next generation. Just for the last minute, I have just one more question for you. You've talked a lot about these maker's marks, which are just, I think, personally fascinating, and locating them and how small they can be. Do you know if did she have any favorite makers? Like, were there any consistent makers that you have come across?
Right, that's a good question too. A lot of her items are not actually marked by who made them themselves, but a lot of them are French in origin.
French,
So
okay.
she had a real affinity for the French culture, just like her husband did, and a lot of that comes from her years spending over there at the time, and them being sort of on the forefront. So in the sense, the tendency for her would have been for French makers, for sure. Specific ones, I don't see a specific pattern, that it would come from one person or another, but definitely French.
Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry. Wonderful. Well, are there any other questions from our audience?
No one, huh? All right.
Not nobody.
Good
Wonderful.
questions
Well,
though that were asked so far. Thank you for
yeah,
those.
these were spectacular.
Good
Awesome,
questions.
awesome, awesome audience. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Jarod, for this wonderful conversation. Yeah, thank you. This has been wonderful. I hope you see these comments in the chat. I learned a lot today about Elizabeth, and I think it's an incredible way to access her and to think about women's history and
Yeah,
as you pointed out so eloquently, you know, their role in some of these really important political moments
yeah,
and how
for
we see
sure.
that through style and
That,
and
that have gone
dress.
missing in history. Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah,
they need to be found.
completely.
Yep.
Yeah.